Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I don't see more ticks coming, so I will go ahead and get started. Again, good evening and welcome to Titan Talks webinar series hosted by the Office of Alumni Engagement at Illinois Wesleyan University. I'm Rosetta Clay, Assistant Vice President of Engagement, and I am so glad you decided to join us tonight. Our series continues with the topic, Leaders in Education, Rising to the Challenges of COVID-19. We have convened a stellar group of alumni with varying perspectives and approaches to education who will share their knowledge and experience of the current implications, their respective efforts, and future discussions necessary to implement long-term solutions for the educational system. They don't have all the answers, but I'm sure they have some great perspectives that they can add to this discussion. As a reminder, all guests are muted, but you are encouraged to use the chat function to ask questions, and we'll do our very best to answer as many of them as possible. If you are an alumnus or a student, please be sure to include your grad year. And for all others, including your affiliation with the university, would be greatly appreciated. As always, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel for future viewing. And now I am delighted to introduce our panelists and our moderator for tonight's discussion. First, we're going in alphabetical order. We have Dr. Gianina Baker, class of 2004. She is the Assistant Director at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. It is a resource research institution founded to discover, document, and disseminate effective assessment of student learning practices at colleges and universities. And just recently, I already shared with her that I was going to do this. She was named Central Illinois Business Magazine's 40 Under 40 class and Woman of the Year for all of her efforts. She is also the vice president of her local school board. So she has done some phenomenal work, and we'll get more into that later. So congratulations, Gianina. Also, we have John Camardella, class of 2003. He teaches college world religion at Prospect High School outside of Chicago and is an education fellow at Harvard's Religious Literacy Project. Amy DeBoer is from the class of 2015, and is a third grade teacher in Oak Forest, Illinois. She also has her master's in curriculum and instruction. Dr. Marcia Gensler-Stevens, class of 1978, is director of the Adele H. Stamp the Adele H. Stamp Student Union Center for Campus Life at the University of Maryland, College Park. And Dr. Erin Moran is a 2012 grad and is a behavior analyst at Positive Behavior Supports Corporation, one of the nation's largest providers of in-home behavioral interventions for children and adults with developmental disorders. And a special thank you to our moderator for this evening, Chandra Shipley. She is the Director of Academic Advising and the coordinator of our disability services. And she has a wealth of experience working with our students here at Illinois Wesleyan. Again, I am so excited about this panel as well as our moderator for this evening. And for many reasons, I am really, really looking forward to this discussion. So Chandra, I'll turn it over to you.
And thank you to Alumni Engagement. I am honored to be with this group of panelists tonight. I want to extend my welcome to all of you back to campus for this short hour and a half. So I was thinking about just an entry remarks, and since COVID started, it's been a scary time, I think, for all of us working in education and for our students. And that uncertainty, sort of the mixed messages that we've gotten from government officials, the inconsistency that we see about how education is being implemented, even within our own districts or with the schools up the street versus the one that we're at. And definitely the rising cases and seeing surges happening in second surges happening in Europe. That is just really, I think, starting to take a toll on a lot of us. And so that said, I have a really good friend and mentor who taught me that information is power. And so I'm hoping with our discussion tonight that we can take the information that we share with each other, how some of the questions are answered, and we can lean on and learn from each other so that then we can bring that information back, well, hopefully to ourselves, and then bring that information back to our colleagues and of course, our students. So I'd first like to just start out by asking a few questions just to all of you, any of you who feel comfortable asking. And so I'd first like to just start off by having you share a little bit more about your current roles and how, what environment you are working or teaching in. Are you able to work remotely, in person, hybrid, high flex? There are so many different iterations of what's happening right now. Here at Wesleyan, students are taking classes in 4 different ways. They're taking classes virtually, they're taking classes in person, they're taking hybrid and high flex. And I think depending on the student, they're taking a mixture of all of those. So I'm just curious to kind of start off there to see where we are in the room.
Well, I will jump in. Hello everyone, Gianina Baker, and class of 2004. I am currently located at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign here, and I'm in Champaign itself. And our campus students are definitely back on campus. Many of the classes are also remote, but many of them are actually on campus. Obviously, those large lecture classes have been condensed, but definitely still happening among campus. Due to that we have saliva testing and students are tested at least twice a week, and those that have been in some precarious situations are tested often and prioritized. Faculty and staff here are asked to at least test once a week, primarily on the weekends, so that way that you can have access to the buildings, and it also doesn't slow the testing down for students. So we are all pretty much working remotely if and when possible, and going to campus when needed. That does not seem to affect my role. We actually have a grant through the Lumina Foundation for Education. It's a nonprofit educational organization in Indianapolis. And by that, we're able to run the funds through the University of Illinois. And so I'm technically an employee, but we provide services thinking about assessment of student learning across the nation. So we often, you can find us at different colleges and universities, specifically focusing on undergraduate education and talking with faculty, staff, provosts, presidents, students about what students should know and be able to do upon graduation within that college or university. So it's not stopped that work at all. We are in fact busier than ever.
I'll jump on my good colleague also in higher ed because I talk to my friends in the Big Ten a lot and we compare notes. So I'm Marcia Gensler-Stevens, class of 1978. I have worked for the last 38 years at the University of Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. They are amazing at basketball and lacrosse, but not so good at football. And so in the Big Ten, oh Lord, it stinks. What I will tell you is we are living in an interesting world, right? My expertise is student affairs. And so I work on the front line with students. And so you can't work with students if you aren't present. So we brought about 40% of our students back in residence. So if you can imagine what would normally be doubles and triples are now a single person. So a little different than my Illinois Wesleyan days, we're about 40,000 students. And so we are about 12,000 students this year. And of that, most of our students have about 20% of their classes in person, science, performance, things that really require it. But I would tell you that a lot of my academic colleagues are not back. They're teaching virtually. I teach freshmen. They're all first-gen students. They're all aspiring bio and chemistry majors. I was an undergrad bio major at Wesleyan, so I have great love for that. And I was to have all 20 of them in class in person. And by the end of the summer, I have 6 of them in person and 14 that are virtually joining us. And I think we in student affairs have staff on site, but most people only work 1 day a week in person, and the rest of the time they're working virtually. That doesn't work well for me. So I work on site more often than not, and feel like being present is really important in the work I do. And I've learned to do that really safely. We test a lot too. We don't do saliva, and you start to look at the differences between testing And so we test about 8,000 people a week. And every month you have to re-up on your testing. And particularly for my colleagues, I supervise about 110 people that are full-time and then another 600 students. And so I have staff that are working in facilities and at the front line. And so we are making sure that, we're using all CDC standards, but testing is critical. And we're really proud of dashboards these days. Who knew we'd talk a language of dashboards, but our infection rate is about 0.5% this week, which makes us just do a happy dance. So we feel really blessed about that. And we only have 40 students currently in quarantine and isolation housing. That also makes us very excited.
I can jump in next. I'm Erin Moran. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina now, but I did grow up in Bloomington, graduated in 2012. And I work in the private sector. So I work for a company, one of the largest nationwide providers of in-home behavioral interventions for children and adults with autism or other developmental disabilities. So what we see are kids as young as 2, just diagnosed with autism, coming to us with minimal language skills. And so we might put them on really intensive interventions to get their language, communication, social skills up to speed, all the way up through adults who maybe need support gaining vocational skills to get a job, and then anywhere in between. And we quite frequently have clients that have very severe problem behaviors, so severe aggression, self-injurious behaviors, property destruction. And so we're mostly providing those services in their home, though we do work in schools as well. And our service delivery model is you have kind of oftentimes a graduate student, but someone who's going in and providing the one-to-one therapy. And that one-to-one therapy is then overseen by a master level clinician who checks in about once a week. And in my role here for North and South Carolina, I oversee the quality of the work of all of our master level clinicians. So I kind of oversee everything, making sure that our master level clinicians have everything they need. And I oftentimes get called in when there's some problems or when there's a challenging case. So prior to COVID, we were all in-person services. We're mostly funded by private insurance companies or Medicaid, neither of which would allow for telehealth services. So then when COVID hit, they opened up and said, yes, you can provide telehealth services. It was a big scramble for us to figure out how to use HIPAA compliant video software. How is this even going to work with a child with disability? Can you have a virtual session with them? And what we kind of found out is that that one-to-one therapist really was not very effective through telehealth. So we kind of had to reschedule to try to minimize. Typically, therapists would work with maybe 2 or 3 families. So we were trying to assign 1 therapist per family. And we were having their master level clinicians Skype in each week. So then the master level clinicians weren't going from home to home. It can be quite challenging. So now we're at the point where it's up to the master level clinicians if they want to continue virtually or if they are comfortable going in person. So we kind of have a mix. In my position, I might be working with 15 different families every week. So I'm not really trying to go into 15 different homes. So I'm doing pretty much purely telehealth services, which definitely has its challenges when I can't see what's going on over here. I can't hear what dad is saying over here. But at the same time, we've actually been able to use this technology to find really cool new ways to work. Like I said, quite often I'm called in when there's some sort of problem. And sometimes if I go in person, having a new person present changes the child's behavior. Or sometimes then they're on their best behavior. And it's hard to help if I can't see what's going on. So what we've actually been able to capitalize on is having kind of discrete observations. So I can call in on a video call, of course, with permission and consent, but without being disruptive to the session. And then our master level clinicians have been wearing the AirPods in their ears. So they're actually able to implement the sessions and I'm able to provide them feedback in their ear on the moment without disrupting their sessions. So there have been some positives that have come out of this. Telehealth funding is extended until the end of the year, and I'm kind of hoping that they will see the benefits of it and continue past this pandemic.
I'll go next. I'm Amy DeBoer, class of 2015. I'm in my 6th year of teaching 3rd grade in Forest Ridge School District, which is a district of about 4 schools in Oak Forest, Illinois. And we were actually one of few districts that implemented some form of in-person learning right at the start of the school year. So we are currently doing a hybrid model of learning. So I have 24 total students that are split into 2 groups, and I meet with each group for 2 days in person, and then they're there for half days. And then Wednesday, we are fully remote as of now, but we are looking to add that as an additional in-person learning day starting next week. So big changes coming already next week. But when I'm not meeting with students in person during the day, when students are working remotely, they have assignments that I give them to do at home. And then I check in with those groups on Zoom in the afternoon, and they attend specials and work with different specialists in the afternoons. So they're only in school till about 12:45, but it has been going remarkably well. We do have some students, of course, that have to quarantine as well as staff members, but I have just been amazed by the level of enthusiasm and excitement from both teachers and students to be in the building. They're wearing their masks every day without complaints, and they are troopers, especially being with younger learners. But it has been really smooth so far in our implementation of the hybrid model.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John Camardella, proud 2003 alum. It's great to be with all of you and everybody joining us online. I'm in my 18th year at Prospect High School, and I teach all seniors in a dual credit course, College World Religion, where we look at traditions around the world across time and place. And we started off the first 9 weeks where I was in the building all day, 8 hours a day by myself in my room, and all the students were remote. And 2 weeks ago, we started transitioning to a hybrid model where a third of students are offered the opportunity to join us in person on a block schedule. So they would come in on back-to-back days. Half of their classes would be on one day. The next day, they would have the second half of their classes. I teach 5 religion courses. In the previous world we inhabited, I would teach 5 50-minute classes a day. And now it's on one day I teach 3 70-minute classes, and the second day I teach 2. It's been wonderful, and I think the option we're all learning to live with is our district has allowed students to make the choice of if and when they come. So it's serving the students and their families extremely well, and it's allowing us the challenge of adapting multiple lesson plans and approaches by having no clue how many students will actually be in your classroom on a given period and a given day. And so to give you an idea, some periods I'll have 9 in person, and yesterday I had one period with 1. I haven't had 0 yet, but as I say, it's one thing educators do well is we can adapt and adjust on the fly as well as anybody. So I always like to say that we're in the service industry, and so doing what we can to serve our students and their families is what we're here to do. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Yeah, just hearing all of you with your answers, I think that adaptability, that flexibility is just something that educators, especially since March, or even before that, it was something that we all, had to somewhat be comfortable with, and it's even gotten more so since all of this happened. Here at Wesleyan this semester, I know I've had a significant uptick with students because of online and remote. So those of you who are working with students either in a hybrid or remote, where they're struggling a little bit with isolation, their mental health, and even keeping up with some of their coursework. And so one of the ways that I've tried to help with that with some of our students is setting up weekly meetings with them so they know they have a touch point that they can count And sometimes even if I just offer that, they're like, really, you'll do that? You know, and because I'm not a professor, but I'm curious, especially maybe Amy, teaching, I think you're teach the youngest group of students on this call. I'm curious if you've seen any sort of struggle with your students and how you've maybe addressed that with everything going on.
Sure. Social emotional learning needs of our students have been a primary focus as we return to some form of in-person learning and remote learning. We always say in our district, the content will come, but the social emotional learning is where our focus has to be right now. I see such a drastic difference in my students from when they are on Zoom to when they are in person. It is almost completely different students. When I see them on Zoom, they're hunched over, they're tired, maybe not as smiley. And then in person, you're almost like, who is that kid? That can't be the same kid. So it's just a crazy difference, and just shows how important that in-person instruction is when I do have them in person. So we're really focusing on building relationships and making each student feel important and feel known. So incorporating interests into instruction and curriculum is crucial. So just finding out, I mean, my students are big fans of Fortnite, which I know nothing about, but hey, if it'll make math engaging, you bet we're going to include something about Fortnite in that math problem. And just finding ways to make them excited and smile and be there, and just finding ways too for them to collaborate with peers from a safe distance. They're spaced 6 feet apart in their desks. So we do lots of turn-in talks and peer talks as much as we can. And they've been great with respecting that distance rule. But we always focus on making school that safe and bright space for them, because a lot of our students are looking for that. If anybody's a One Tree Hill fan, there's a great quote in the show where they say, somebody told me that this is the place where everything's better and everything's safe. And I love that. And I have it written on my board in my classroom, because that's a reminder for me that each student is walking in there wanting to be there, and they need to be there. So we need to make it that space where they're going to feel safe, they're going to feel loved, and where they can truly get the nurturing and the care that they maybe have been missing in this extended time away from school.
That's wonderful. Marcia, I saw you nodding your head quite a bit, so I was wondering if you wanted to add anything to that.
Well, I want Amy to come to the University of Maryland. You know, one of the things I think is really interesting, and Gianina and I would echo on this, college students are probably not that different than third graders. I mean, it's a generation of students that is, research suggests, is the most lonely, right now, and has this great need for belonging. And so as you were talking, Amy, I was thinking a lot about how social media was and is still a critical means of that sense of belonging, or that sense of connection for college students. But I will tell you that we are experiencing more and more students at the University of Maryland, I think true nationally, that are experiencing anxiety and depression, and, you know, sort of what might have been present is exacerbated. What wasn't present is appearing. And Erin, I loved when you were talking about, you know, being able to do teletherapy even across state lines, right? When you have an enrollment that's national, was really critical for our psychologists and psychiatrists to be able to think about how to do that. I come back to, Chandra, what you were talking about too. That need for connection is so critical at a time when you feel so disconnected, right? Some people have reinvigorated their relationship with family, right? Because you were all sort of staying at home together. Others, that brought out the discord, the dissonance in life, or even, you know, to Amy's point, not being that safe. And so we continue to house people throughout the early stages of the pandemic when we had a stay-at-home order, because it wasn't safe for certain students to be at home, or they didn't have home. You know, students who are in the foster care system who are now in college, they didn't have home. This was home. I think about your point, Chandra, about being present for students, saving space for them. And sometimes that's, you know, you want to have lunch virtually? Do you want to talk about this? I was teaching all seniors in the spring when we took off, not knowing when we'd get back. It was the end of their college career, you know, and they were going to make meaning of this with their friends. And then it didn't happen, right? And so I spent a lot of time thinking, these are the 20 students I will nurture through this experience, right? These are my people. And so you spend a lot of time Zooming and on the phone and doing lots of things to intervene because they were your people to take care of. And I think, you know, we're gonna have to figure out how we climb our way out of this because I think the incidence of mental and emotional health is gonna be a big issue to wrestle with.
I'm just kind of reading through some of the questions because I want to make sure that we're kind of going with a good flow. So I'm wondering, those of you who are in the classroom this semester, if you could share some of the ways that you've had to, and Erin, with the work that you've done too, how you've had to change your curriculum to either meet the learning needs of the students or just because of the technological challenges and changes that we've had to make.
Well, I think for us, you know, I think many people are aware that for kids with autism in particular, that routine is really important and that they like things to be on a schedule and on a routine, and that routine is gone. Like that routine is out the window. So what we're really seeing is that our students the children with autism are really struggling right now. Many of the students maybe don't have the language to express, you know, the different things that are going on, but we can see it through their, you know, behavioral difficulties that they're experiencing. And as a company, we've seen almost a 10% increase actually in hours that we're providing. So we have tons of new families that are coming to us and families wanting increased services, which is indicating to me that the families are struggling, that the children are struggling. And as you know, you academics are probably very aware of, is that you have kind of the research to practice gap. So research comes out with a great intervention. It takes a very long time for that to become standard practice. So kind of recently in the research, there was a new way to assess and to treat severe problem behavior. And we've kind of have known about it for a little while, have kind of discussed it a little bit. But with the, you know, increase in problem behavior that we've been seeing and the increase in families that were coming in, as a company, we're doubling down and really investing a lot of money into getting our clinicians trained in this new intervention so that we can teach the children, you know, if you're having a difficult day, which most days are, because we don't know, you know, they're very unpredictable, you know, instead of engaging in these problem behaviors, let's communicate. Here's how you can tolerate not getting your way, and here's how you can cooperate to get through the day. So we're really pushing to try to get the latest and the best interventions out to our people to help our students who are struggling right now.
John, have you had change in your curriculum? Has it stayed pretty static and you've just had to change your mode of delivery?
It's sort of yes and yes in a fun way, because it is a dual credit course and we're trying to find, and I think most of us in the profession are trying to strike that balance with social emotional learning as well as rigor. And making sure that we are letting our students know how much we care about them, how much we're here for them, but also that because we care about them and we're here for them, we also want to make sure that we pass them on to the next level of education, that they're prepared. And so I come at it in the language I've used is to try and see what we're currently dealing with as an opportunity, not an obstacle. And that language has helped us. And a big shift in our curriculum that I've tried to employ each unit is to help students grapple with their situatedness, so that they're confronting both the situatedness of what we're studying, of the different religions and different contexts across time and place, but also their own situatedness as thinkers and learners who are currently shaped by these contexts in which they're living. And I think that's helping them come to understand themselves and the world around them a little bit more clearly, more honestly during this time period. And this sort of new approach to teaching, it's always been part of our curriculum, but I'm more intentional with it now. You know, we begin with this basic assumption that students come to absorb, to understand and retain the knowledge we're trying to get them to wrestle with when they're actively engaged in the pursuit of understanding. And so we always have given students choice in how they go about researching different topics. And so, for an example, you know, right now we're doing a deep dive into Tibetan Buddhism and the concept of reincarnation with the Dalai Lama and other lamas. And so what I'll do is we'll engage with a few sources, and then I'll give them choice in terms of what secondary sources they read or watch. And then I'll give them a series of 8 to 10 questions and let them pick 3. And so they're actively engaged with, I want to read this, I want to watch this, you know, and I would like to be assessed in this way. And so when students are actively engaged and addressing these questions that are of concern to them, right, in pursuing greater understanding about something that matters to them, we feel a lot better, and we sort of see their imaginations take off. And during a time like this, allowing students to be creative and think in new ways has been a big part of how we've tried to offer them opportunities at success.
And I think that comes across with, at least here at Wesleyan, our faculty and staff as well. And I'm guessing for all of you, I mean, this has been a great time, I think, of professional development, you know, sort of because of the situation forced upon us in a certain way, because we want to make sure that we're serving our students to the best of our abilities. Gianina, I'm curious how you feel like assessment might be changing of all of this, with all of these new technologies and different things that folks are trying, and even, you know, the differences between K through 12 and then higher education. And then with this assessment, has it even started yet? How long will it take? When are we going to see the effects? I know that was like 9 million questions rolled into one. But I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that.
I would build off of what John just said. I mean, much of what we're seeing in K-12 is exactly what we hope to see in higher ed. I think we often go back to the premise that if we really think about college and who it was meant for, it was white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men. It wasn't for people like me, unless you went to potentially a historically Black college and university. And so the global pandemic that we see before us gives us exactly what you said, John, is an opportunity to completely dismantle some of these systems, especially ones that are structural and perpetuate systemic racism, and rebuild exactly for the students that we have and that we want to serve. And in that, I think what we have seen from a higher ed perspective is just going back to the basics of assessment, right? What is it that we are, again, trying to measure? If we think of assessment as just good questions about teaching and learning, that's what we like to do. That's what faculty enjoy, right? And thinking about what it is that they went to school for and pushing in the space of their subject matter. I think we often say, and being a former counselor at a community college, not everyone is a great online learner, right? They weren't necessarily built, they weren't set up in that way. And so if we think about that right now, especially, a lot of what we're seeing is emergency remote instruction. It's not online learning. So this is not a test of online learning. If we're really intentional about creating online learning, we involve things like backwards design and mapping to get to that space. And so we don't want to say that online education doesn't work, because we want to actually see it's really about learning in a global pandemic crisis more than anything else. What we've emphasized in the assessment space is that compassion needs to be the overgirding piece of this, right? Not compliance. So how can we really use compassion to help drive decisions? And I think, John, I think you pointed out, Marsha, venue is listening to students and being flexible, which is really hard to do, I know. And especially as John pointed out, it's not diminishing quality or rigor. It is allowing students to demonstrate what they know and can do in the most appropriate way that they know how. There's a community college up north that they were talking about how they were creating this equity-minded assignment. And with all of the recent incidents of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, they actually incorporated that into an assignment to give to all of their students and said, if you would like to write about this, and had a rubric, corresponding rubric and everything else with it. But I think that captures exactly what John was talking about, right? Being completely relevant, culturally relevant at this time, and using that to really get what students know and can do in a different way, especially if one of your learning outcomes institutionally is multicultural competency and what that looks like. And so if, you know, those are some spaces that you want to push in, I think that that's, there are some really good examples that are out there. I think a couple of other things that we've heard about is the pass-fail piece, and do we allow students to use that as an option, or, you know, what about the grading piece of it? Cheating is a really big, huge, it has its own literature base now just because of the spring. And we often talk about it shouldn't be about blocking cheating, but enabling learning and what that actually looks like, and how we can use assessment of student learning to help with that. And I think that again, it's another opportunity to go deeper in our learning when we think about authentic assessment and what that looks like, and being able to apply learning into different contexts. If we use this as the opportunity to do that and not just continue to go at the surface level, we really can use assessment to push students and bring in their experiences from athletics, right, from the employment space, and start to make those connections that are so deeply needed as they go out into the world, whether it's graduate school or employment. So lots in the higher ed space. A couple of things that I would just point out in K-12, and there were some really good webinars that are happening now that are really looking at systemic racism in this space. And we often talk about this achievement gap, and even pushing a little bit further into this opportunity gap. What I've been hearing more recently is this caring and justice gap. And I know here in Champaign, we've struggled a very long time with our Black students. And in fact, many of our students have not connected since March. So even though we are one-to-one and we provided hotspots and we provided places for our students to go and hopefully access, it's not happening. And so this is an inequitable pandemic. It's been a system that has perpetuated these gaps for our students. And so we really have to take some very, very hard looks into not just root cause, but trying to figure out and do it now, right? How do we want our systems to look in terms of policies and practices? But it's bigger than just one person, and solutions are needed at all levels. And I hope they're teacher-led, Amy and John.
That leads really great into one of the questions, because we all know that there's been racial and socioeconomic disparities in education forever. And so, you know, some of the news stories are just sort of heartbreaking about students having to go with their laptops into a Taco Bell parking lot to get Wi-Fi, or four siblings sharing a laptop. And I don't know, obviously there's not a magic wand to one answer to this question. I'm curious if Amy, John, if you've seen any of that in your school districts, or even Marsha. I know we're providing laptops to certain students whose either their laptop is broken and then they can't afford to buy a new one, and so on. So I'm just kind of curious if there has been ways that your either school district, your school, have been addressing some of those issues.
So to accommodate this new format of education, our district has gone one-to-one. So every student in our district has their own iPad given to them by our school district, and they have that for the entire school year. They take it home with them so they can do all of their Zoom sessions, and then they bring it to school each day and do things in our classrooms with them as well. But for those students that do not have access to Wi-Fi or limited space to do it. We've given hotspots out to some of our families so that they can get Wi-Fi access. We also have some students that spend the majority of their remote days at a daycare or childcare facility. So we've also supplied hotspots to those childcare facilities so that our students can connect to our district server and complete all of their remote work there, which has been wonderful and greatly appreciated by families too. But we also know that a lot of our students come from households where parents may be working more than one job, and maybe single parent households that cannot sit with their student all day and ensure they are on Zoom, they are completing all of their work. So I know myself and my coworkers are very flexible with our parents and saying, hey, if you don't get to the work between the hours of 8 and 3, that is okay. If you need to be doing it or working on it at 6 p.m., 9 p.m., whatever works for you in your schedule, that is fine. I'm not going to be sending you emails saying, where is the work? You haven't turned it in. So I think there has to be a lot of grace from both sides and a lot of patience and flexibility and just understanding what each student's diverse case is and noticing what their needs are and how they differentiate and differ from their peers.
And I can add on to that just very quickly is that I have multiple students per class that I've spoken with who intentionally leave their cameras off, that they just don't want their living situation, their background. They don't want a lens into that world. I'd be the first one to say that even when I put kids in breakout rooms, you know, there's still an awkwardness that we know each other now, but you know, when I joke, when I bust up into a breakout room, it's like busting up into somebody's house. You know, it's very awkward. And so I got that awkwardness right, and we laugh now, you know, when that happens. But I've also made arrangements. Right now I have 3 students who refuse to turn their cameras on in class. But after we met one-on-one, I've asked them to remain on afterwards, where they will turn their cameras on and we will talk, and I will make sure that we've addressed the lesson, the content, the assignment. And that's our own way of negotiating this. And our relationships have deepened. And I think that's all we can do as educators is be as flexible as we can in service to these students. Like I said, we're here to provide this education, but also, like I would say, compassion and empathy, which I've heard echoed from multiple people on this call tonight.
I think
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't had any expulsions. It's the first time that there have been at least 3 months in the school year that we have had 0 expulsions. So in many times when we think about space and place, our schools often for some of our students are just oppressive environments. And so the fact that, I mean, I'm not saying you heard they have their screens off, and I'm sure potentially not even listening in class. There are all these other things that are happening, but that is huge. And I don't know like how it feels for you, but I just feel like we are allowing kids to in some ways be kids and not having adult consequences for some of the things that they've been expelled for. And so I just want to point that out in the compassion.
And to that point, and building on the others as well, you know, financially families are hurting. And so I so appreciate when institutions can provide some of the resource you need in order to even remain in school, both undergraduates and graduate students as well. And one of the things that I very much appreciated was spending much of the summer reading applications for caring grants. You know, we had given away technology, and we had like emergency loans upon emergency loans for faculty and staff, but for students, to be able to give them grants, to be able to say, you know, this will tide you and your family with rent for the next month, and then to go deeper. We raised $1 million in 2 months. To afford people, you know, sort of emergency grants, but also to stock a food pantry that was well used, right, previously, and now was critical. You know, our dining staff, when they stopped having the number of students they started making hot meals for the county in which we're located, because the reality is the county could provide some of the food resource because farmers didn't have anywhere to sell it, right, to restaurants, but they needed someone to fix it. So our staff just said, let it be us, right? And so I think about, you know, well-being. It's both intellectual well-being, but it's also physical well-being. It's mental well-being, but it's also financial well-being, right? And the sense that you can bring your whole self to the enterprise means that we should wrap our arms around you in that compassionate, right, way with lots of grace, because like I have a student right now who takes her class in her closet, right? And it's getting, her closet's becoming a more habitable place as we get further into the term, but it's the only place where she is alone, right? In a family that has a lot of people living in a small space. And I think like now she's proud of the fact that she's got new pillows in her closet, but that family was struggling to pay their rent. And, you know, like, I think you got to think about all of it. It's part of what we are as educators. We're also, you know, engaged in the act of unleashing the possibilities, right? And some of those possibilities are financial in nature. I tell one quick story. I never forget that this pandemic has disproportionately affected Black and Brown people. And it is so apparent for me in my colleagues. Early on in the pandemic, I had 2 colleagues who were hospitalized in critical condition with COVID-19, both Latinx. Eventually they would come home, and, you know, one of them called me one Friday night and said, I knew you were worried, you've been worried, I'm home, and as is my husband. And I got to tell you, like, I busted out bawling in a way that was wholly unprofessional. And Monday morning when she called me to tell me that her husband had died over the weekend, I went to a meeting where we were talking about layoffs and other financial consequences of this, and it is significant, right? And I am a person who is always glass half full. I'm a Midwestern middle child, right? I busted out bawling in a meeting I shouldn't have been crying in. And I said, today I have to tell you, I have a face for what we're talking about, right? Disproportionately Black and Brown in our part of the world that is Maryland, the county with the highest rate of infection is the county in which the University of Maryland is located, disproportionately Black and Brown. So when I think about the impact of not only who we are as learners, but who we are as people being affected by a physiologic condition, like I think we have to think about how we wrap our arms around the people we teach, but the people we work with as well.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that a number of the families that we serve, the parents don't speak English or they have limited English skills. And it's been a tremendous struggle for their families because their children can't access online learning by themselves. So they need their parents to become a teacher, which they don't know, they haven't been trained to be teachers, but they're also trying to navigate through Blackboard or whatever online learning tool they're using without speaking the language, and then trying to teach the course, you know, in a language they don't understand. It's been very difficult for them. And we're not, you know, a tutoring service or an educational service, but just as you're saying, it's hard to watch someone struggle. So we've been providing just a little bit of additional assistance outside of our, you know, session times to help make sure that the families can write an email to the teacher asking, are they in group A or are they in group B? You know, what time do they need to log into Zoom? How can they get onto this course? Just because, you know, it's a struggle. So I think we're all just trying to pull it together, you know, and help each other through it.
I actually am trying to keep an eye on the chat too, and I was going to wait until the questions at the end, but I actually think that this is a good one after what we just spoke about. How can we express our gratitude to teachers and educators and leadership in the community?
I think a big one for this is just checking on your teacher friends. This is a hard time to be a teacher. It's a hard time to be a student. So just anytime I get an email from even a parent or a friend that just says, hey, how's it going? What do you need? What can I be doing? Or what can I be doing to check in on you or being there for you? That goes a long way. So I think just to know someone else is thinking of you, but also something we just appreciate too from our parents in our district is just patience and kindness. We have parents on both sides, some parents that don't necessarily agree with the way we are running our hybrid model. And then we have parents that are very supportive. So it's always nice to see that positivity come through and just appreciation for however it's working in some form or another. And then I always joke too that Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts gift cards are always a nice treat for teachers. They go a long way. We run on coffee, and so that's always a nice bonus.
Chandra, I'm just going to jump in here and help you with the with the chat. Daniel Basil, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Daniel is a 68 grad, and he said earlier in response to Gianina's remarks that he wishes all students at IWU were engaged in this conversation with Gianina. It should have been happening years ago. And then Yesha, that's actually her dad. I guess he's using her account, but she's a high school student here. But that comment was actually from her dad about how to express gratitude to teachers.
Can I add one thing? And I saw that piece of chat, and I saw that she was a high school student and her dad was with her as well. I think about high school students right now who are looking at colleges, and it's a very odd time to be looking at colleges, right? So to be present for people in your community or at your church or wherever it is you connect with those high schoolers that are looking, to be able to tell stories, to be able to show sort of an interest in what people are doing. I think about alumni. Like, we were so grateful this summer when so many of our students went without their usual internships that they'd been hired for because they could no longer be present. When we had folks say, I can make up a virtual internship, or I can open my door to that. So even thinking about, if you could join us in this effort, that's a great way to show gratitude to educators, right? Is how do we, sort of create virtual experiences to look at college, virtual conversations about career, opportunities to engage in, chat rooms that are, a part of a larger enterprise, or breakout rooms where you really do talk about the meaning of life or your career interest or whatever to a group of students on the precipice of graduating from college or high school or wherever that is. I think if you can help us in this enterprise, and I never forget my colleagues who have young children at home, and they're trying to do all of this while caring for their young children. So, whatever we can do to support those colleagues who are balancing multiple parts of life simultaneously, I think, is the other piece that's really critical.
How are those of you who are balancing both work and kids at home doing it? I admire you all, and I wonder often. So I'm curious, those of you who, since I'm just meeting you all for the first time this evening, I'm not sure. I think Gianina, you've got some kiddos at home, and
Three boys.
3 boys. Okay, I had 3 younger brothers, so I feel for you.
It's a very interesting space to be in.
I'm sure, and I don't know if any others, but just how you're balancing being an educator and seeing all that's going on in the world, and then also making sure you provide that education to your own children.
I have said often I am not a teacher. I did not go to school to be a teacher. My bachelor's is in psychology. I have a counseling degree, and Ph.D. is educational organization leadership, specifically higher ed. There are people like Amy and John who are teachers, and I would never take that title away from them. They definitely know what they're doing in that space. So I am potentially, though, like a lunch lady and a custodian and some other things. A teacher's aide. I am a teacher's aide. That's exactly an appropriate title. I have a 13, 11, and 8-year-old. And my 8-year-old actually just went back in person today for a couple of hours and some independent learning later on. I would say that my productivity is nowhere near where it's been. And I have to learn to be okay with that. I think many of us are still trying to figure out how much to be productive in. And there's so many conversations that are happening around that. And I think as a woman, and especially as a Black woman in this space. We've seen a lot of conversations happening about just women in general and them leaving the workplace to take care of children, and to think about the knowledge management that's lost, the intellectual knowledge that's lost because of that, I think is incredibly disheartening. And so trying to still continue doing the professional thing, as well as taking much more personally. My husband's a nurse anesthetist, so his job is, he's in the hospital every single day. He's always going to be needed and much more in high demand than mine is. And so, you know, how can I help him help others in that space? And so one day at a time, 1 hour at a time. I mean, that's how we'll get it done. But if we all work together in this and keep trying to provide solutions, I love Dr. Fauci's cautiously optimistic phrase, because that's where I sit.
So one quick question in the chat from Warren Kistner. There is discussion in a variety of fields about permanent changes once we get through the pandemic. What changes do you see being made in education that may continue moving forward?
Here's a crazy one. I never knew what Zoom was until March, right? And I've gotten a lot better into Gianina's conversation about, you know, learning to teach online, right? I do think we'll do some things online we never thought. Teletherapy being one of those, right? Telemedicine being one of those. But the one that makes me laugh is I was in a conversation with a student this afternoon, and she would never take a group fitness class because she was embarrassed by her body. And so they offered fitness classes on Zoom to you, cameras off, right? So she started doing it at home all March. She is in the rec center now because she said, I feel so good about who I am, but I would have never gotten there had I not sort of virtually. So I think we're going to do some things, continue to do some things virtually that we never thought, right? At a Research One institution, holy crap, we would never be teaching online, right? But we're teaching online. And I think we're going to offer some resources online. I also think we won't, at least for a while, take for granted the joy of being in a room with someone, of giving someone a hug after they've done something extraordinary. And I don't know when we'll get to that, right? I don't know when we'll get to the hug, but to be in a room with someone is a gift. And just to be a glass half empty person, financially, it's going to take us a long time to recover from this. You know, we were looking at budgets, and, you know, I think higher ed is lucky, right? There's a flow of cash that isn't in every elementary and high school district, right? But I have to tell you, we're envisioning that next fiscal year, so next academic year, we will be in very similar circumstances to the one we're in right now. Like, I don't know that we're going to get on the front side of this until sometime into 22. And so, you know, we're predicting some pretty dire straits for families, but also for institutions in higher ed.
I think in higher ed too, we've, you know, social media has been so big for our students, and the iPhone and the iGen and has been so big for our students. And I think they are, at least in college, I'm curious, in high school, John, if you've seen this too, but they're just missing that sense of community, more so than I thought that they might, because I would have thought maybe that they would have kind of attached themselves more to the online and been okay with it. And I kind of am, and maybe it's just Zoom fatigue and all of that setting in. But I'd love to hear your response to that question as well.
Yeah, there's so many intersections here in my very limited, you know, understanding of this. Our students do live in an online world and lived in it before COVID. And I think all of us in the field, no matter what our station, would be well served to remember that. As you know, as many of us, I share with my students, I didn't get a cell phone until my second year of teaching at Prospect. Like, you know, and to go through all of college without a phone, like, wow, what that, you know, they laugh when I say that, but I think it does remind, into Warren's question. Hey, Warren, miss you. I hope you're well. But I hope this allows us to allow students more to explore their creativity. You know, we've moved to a block schedule, you know, and students used to show up at 7:30 a.m. and be in class until 2:50, right? And go through 6 or 7 subjects, you know, and we're telling them, like, think for yourself, be creative, you know, do all this fun stuff. Now sit here for 300 minutes a day while we tell you what we, right? It's just, this is a great opportunity for education to really rethink how we do things. You know, so many times people have told us, you know, that the jobs that, you know, our current students are going to have the opportunity to fill aren't even like created yet, or they're still in the process of being developed. And so I really do think we need, before we rush back to 8 periods a day, and if my superintendent's on here, you know, call me after this panel and we'll talk. But in my opinion, we need to really rethink. I love the fact that we have 70 minutes uninterrupted together with students, where I can lecture for 15 minutes, give them a half hour, right? Come back for 15 minutes. I mean, it is very much, you know, what my experience was at Illinois Wesleyan, where I would have a couple of classes on Tuesday, a couple of classes on Wednesday, time to think, time to digest, time to go for a workout, time to nap, time, right? Just a nice balanced life, you know, as long as I kept those things balanced. And so I hope that we can do that collectively with stakeholders, from administration down to students, as we rethink how to best serve, you know, our communities and where we're at, and all aspects of our community. So here's hoping.
Can I add on to that? I think, John, that's exactly the conversations I've been having in my mind, right? When we think about K-12, it was developed for sons of farmers. And, you know, we go to school in August and we get out in May. Perhaps we start to think about changing the school calendar, right? We often had snow days and couldn't access things like e-learning because some of our districts weren't e-learning. Now everyone and many of our districts are one-to-one. That changes, I think, what snow days or even heat days potentially even look like, right? I often think even in higher ed, we have been so bound to this credit hour system. And so now perhaps we can move beyond that and start to think about competencies. And I think, to John's earlier point, right, if we really start to, we're going to have to assess students in each of our courses at the very beginning, because we don't know what it is that they know offhand anymore, because just the pandemic, everyone is in different spaces. So that's going to make us do much more formative assessment, which is a really good thing that we want to see in assessment of student learning. And on top of that, students can help us co-create that course, whether it's in terms of learning outcomes or rubrics or the assignment itself. These are all opportunities that we've been waiting to just kind of have that chance to do. And if we take this opportunity to do that, that absolutely can happen. I think, to Warren's question, what I've heard a lot around, specifically in higher ed, are the co-curricular spaces. And so if there's any space right now in I think higher ed, that's at not risk, but hasn't really fully told its story and how it connects students to experiences outside the classroom, it is that. And those are most at risk of being lost, especially as we have to think about budget and the resources that are there. And so I urge, if you're in that space, to really start to think about how you fit into your institution's assessment story, because we know the importance of co-curricular experiences, but not everyone's able to really talk about that meaningfully.
You know, and I think you're spot on, because at the end of, during the summer and at the end of spring term, when we were doing assessment of all students, of faculty, of staff, you know, one of the things we heard loud and clear from students, regardless of their year in school, was what they missed the most was their connection to other people, but particularly in out-of-class spaces, right? That ability to play a sport, that ability to engage in a student organization or to have a campus job, that's what they missed.
Yeah, you all actually led into another question in the chat, is, can you envision a future where students are more independent and motivated learners as a result of having to do remote learning for so long, and with educators as coaches and facilitators? And so I think you all kind of just led right into that question. And then one other question that was mentioned from Ann Harding, a former staff member. A friend of mine teaches at a public university and has become very discouraged with the teaching field and is considering seeking another profession. Have you felt that or had conversations with other teachers who are feeling this way? I can't imagine that you haven't, but just her question.
I
Well,
think, oh, go ahead, Erin.
I was just going to say that we've had several teachers come to us over the summer who were really apprehensive about going back to the school year, not knowing what it was going to be like. And so they did switch careers to come over for something that was a little bit more predictable. So that's something that I have noticed.
Yeah, I think just like anybody in any career field, there are good days and bad days. There are the tough ones that you go home and you just, man, you are completely down. And then there are those days where you are just reminded of why you even entered the teaching profession. I mean, those moments when you get an email from a former student that says, I still remember this that you taught me, or I never could have imagined doing this until I did it in your class. And I save all of those. And those are the things I look at on those days where you just feel completely discouraged and defeated. And I think one of my coworkers calls it her happy file, and she just stuffs student letters and parent emails and anything she gets that makes her remember why she entered the teaching profession in that happy file. And that's what we go to on those hard days. But have I ever thought about leaving the profession? Absolutely not. I'm one of those rare birds that knew I wanted to be a teacher from like 6 years old. I had a basement classroom that I would make all the neighborhood kids come over to. And I don't care if it was even summer, we were doing schoolwork. And so I am reminded constantly, even when it's tough, that this is an essential career field, and what we do matters, even when it feels like it doesn't. But you may not see instant results, but eventually in the end, it's those students that come back, it's those coworkers who thank you for what you do, that really brings it all back to reminding you your why you entered this profession in the first place.
I was teaching a graduate seminar this summer, all aspiring folks in higher ed. They were all finishing their first year master's, on their way to their second. And I was kind of moaning about the fact that this would normally be a seminar where we'd be in the room and it would be an incredible discourse. But there was a silver lining in this, and that was you could bring people from all across the world into your classroom, right? People who'd done maybe a graduate work 30 years ago or 10 years ago. There were folks that, were the dean of students at UC Berkeley, or folks who'd been the vice president for student affairs at Oregon State, or maybe this amazing person at the Aspen Institute. They could come into your classroom in this virtual world in which we live and impart wisdom, and also just be invigorated by young minds, right? And so I think the opportunity to be in community, if we just broaden the definition of what is community, right, a little bit, there is amazing stuff that can happen. I never forget that I have a young friend who's in first grade, and she was really, really sad about not being able to go to school, real school, she said, this year. And so we were talking on the phone, and I said, Maya, I have to tell you, I hated kindergarten. And here's why I hated kindergarten. I explained, it was a deep, catharsis with Maya for a minute. And I said, so what do you love to do? And she said, I love art. And I said, great. And so I just sent her a big ass package of art supplies, right? And then I realized that Maya was teaching me too, right? So maybe I'm meant to color. Maybe I'm meant to find ways to garden in a way that makes beauty. And so Maya and I trade drawings and painted rocks and all of that kind of thing, because I think sometimes we look for our teachers, but our teachers find us. And, I think there are first graders out there teaching us how to do stuff, to be curious.
Gotta love my motion detected light in my face after it's dark out. I apologize. I actually wanted to go back to Daniel's question, where I'm not sure that we addressed that. I do think even at the college here that our students are having to learn to become more independent. There are quite a few of our first year students who still struggle with their time management and going from, you know, high school to college sometimes is a huge transition. And so that is one thing that we definitely here at Wesleyan are working on this semester. We also started a pilot program this fall for students who are at home doing all remote learning, and we're going to be continuing it in the spring. Rosetta is actually one of our coaches for our students. Thank you, Rosetta. So I do think that there might be some independence and different types of learning that our students haven't had before. I want to go back to some of our other questions.
Can I add to Daniel's part? I think if you've read the work, I'm sure I'll screw up his name, but Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, talks exactly about that, right? That we're not just we're not transactional in our experience with students, but we are facilitators of knowledge as instructors and as educators. And so if we take that approach, and I think John was getting there earlier, if we take that approach, absolutely, that is exactly what we are hoping for. I think we are often in the space that I sit in talking about student agency and wanting students to take charge of their own education, right? I remember when I went to Wesleyan and I had the little catalog myself, and I was going through my program and checking off to make sure I had each of my electives and each of the, you know, specific gen ed courses. I did that. Not all students know that. And in fact, I mean, what I'm hoping through the work of really doing some deep assessment of student learning, we're uncovering this hidden curriculum that I had no idea about, that students were accessing on the same campus, but through the work of being very explicit about our learning outcomes and what that course, that program, that institution is teaching, right? And not having 20 learning outcomes for a course, but maybe 2 or 3 that then lead on to the follow-on course. By thinking about what that is, I think absolutely then students become much more a part of their education and can facilitate that in a much better way. I think often to the current examples within our student conduct divisions, where students aren't necessarily listening to the advice of some of our administrators in terms of COVID-19 protocol. And if we take that as an opportunity to talk about what conflict resolution is, think about that as opposed to it just being a normal part of life. But this is a learning experience that for our students, they're potentially grabbing that and then being able to practice that later on.
And Daniel did have one additional follow-up, and then Chandra, we can go to the other questions. It was, can this self-motivated learning begin in elementary school and grow from there as a result of remote learning? And maybe Amy, that's a question that you could think about.
Absolutely. And to echo Gianina's quote about the teacher being the facilitator, that is best practice, right? That is something that should be already occurring in every classroom level. Part of 21st century teaching and learning is the teacher is the facilitator and is a guide and is encouraging and inspiring students to pursue their passions and engage in student-led research projects. I think a great way to start this autonomy and student designed work is through passion projects, and encouraging students to find something they're passionate about and researching it, developing plans, even real world problems. I mean, I have 3rd graders that come up with the coolest design solutions for reducing the impacts of weather-related hazards each year as part of our curriculum. And it is so cool, from anything from a helmet that will support you in a drought to specialized goggles that protect you from a snowstorm. So finding those opportunities to engage students in their passions and discovering ways to make what they are passionate about part of the curriculum is a great way to start and getting them to be independent and in charge of their own learning.
Gianina, so Rosetta shared that you're a member of the school board and you were instrumental in just passing a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. Why was that important, and how do you believe it will be critical in future decisions for the district?
I think there's a bit of relevance even with the Illinois Wesleyan community in this, in that we hadn't been, we haven't just recognized our history and the role that not only the school board and the district played, especially in terms of the outcomes of our Black students. And so this was just a start, right? And bringing about a process of truth and reconciliation to say we acknowledge and we hear and we know where we have messed up in many ways. And so how can we just take a break from this and say we want to move forward? And so I, along with one of my other board members, saw that the Akron Public School District in Ohio actually just passed theirs. And so we were using this critical race moment that was happening in our country and both nationally and locally, and saying, how can we then push that here? And so we're starting to, as a school board member, I don't work for the district, is completely volunteer. The only employee that we have is the superintendent, so I can't tell everyone what to do. We can only go through the superintendent in that space. And through that, we have said, we really want to look at our policies. We know that we need to provide much more race conscious policies, and that they have been very inadequate for a while. And not only that, but we started to look at our curriculum just last night at our school board meeting. We had I know it's language, but language matters. We had a course on minority authors, and ever since the beginning, I said, don't call it that. I don't think that's appropriate. Like, that's not what it is that that course is doing. And so there's a recommendation for diverse voices in literature, which much more appropriately represents what it is in that course. We talked about acknowledging Juneteenth as a holiday within our district, as well as not calling it Columbus Day, but Indigenous Peoples Day. Right, so there's definitely symbolic pieces there, but it's also going so far as to having some real deep conversations about school resource officers and the role that they play in our school. And so it was incredibly important to me, obviously, as I have three Black children in the school system, and I stand for public education, yet demand more of it for that reason. And so it's been a big deal. And as you can see, education, assessment, I love it. I will talk all day about it. And I think many of us on the call we could have all kinds of good conversations, but it was incredibly important for it to be a start, and for teachers and administrators to recognize that we support them in the work that they're doing to become anti-racist. And Amy, if you want a job, come on over. John, you too. I want to take a course from you. Erin, we absolutely need you. You already know that. Marsha, come on over. Big 10, I got you.
John and Amy have, with COVID and all going on, how do I phrase this question, but what are some of the ways that have you been able to also incorporate what's going on in the world with racism right now, whether it's in correlation to COVID, that it is affecting more Black and brown people, or just what's going on in our country with racial injustice right now? Has that also been a topic in some of your classes?
I'm happy to dive in here. Back in 2016, I can start in 2016. Dr. Diane Moore at Harvard Divinity School, we were on a project together to work on some guidelines for how to teach about religion in public schools. And I was familiar with her work. And as we got to know each other a little bit more, she finally flew out to Prospect High School. And back in late 2016, early 2017, we pretty much did an audit of my 40 weeks. And from 2009 to 2016, we had used a textbook to teach about religion, with our motivating factor being that we wanted to be constitutionally sound when teaching about religion and culture. Right? That was the overarching goal. And Dr. Moore, in a very supportive, healthy but direct way, was like, you need to change. You are, obviously, she was using language that, I had heard but had never employed. Now, I say this to you as someone who was 13 years into his career of teaching and had completed a couple masters. And I spent about 18 months with the team at Harvard Divinity School rewriting all 40 weeks of my curriculum to provide space for female voices, I love what Gianina said, like diverse voices. We make sure that marginalized people have a space. And I actually begin in the second day, and I have for the last 4 years, we begin with a quote from Freire. If you noticed when you said that, Gianina, I'm turning around looking, I was like, where'd I put the book? I have it within reach. I don't know where I put it. And we begin with a sentence that says, never in the history of humanity has violence been initiated by the oppressed. And I make the kids sit with it for an entire week. And it's through that lens that this year, and I'll end with this, is that with the help of the team at the Religious Literacy Project, we put together a lengthy dive into George Floyd's murder, in addition to Trump's photo op in front of St. John's Church and the internal diversity of responses across Christian communities within our country, and equipped our students to recognize how voices were coming out, predominantly against, but some for, and why. You know, what factors were at play, and because it needed to be addressed. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be talked about on a weekly basis. And I'm always looking for a variety of people to come in, even tonight with the people who are on this panel, of let's figure out ways to continually, improve in how we help students engage as we work on this anti-racist curriculum, and really stand here as people that are, and I try and say this, like, that are confident enough in what they do, but humble enough to know what we don't know and what we have not experienced, so that we can make our classrooms available for everyone.
And I will add on to that too. I mean, being a teacher of younger students, we may not go into a lot of the topics that are going on in our world as in-depth as a higher level education, but one of the biggest things we do is in recent years is just making sure the literature we're using and the texts and the books that our students are reading are representative of them as individuals too, and that they are diverse in that their main character looks like them, celebrates the same holidays as them, and making them feel more included and engaged in what they're reading. So that's a huge thing that we've been doing. And another thing that we've been focusing on, one of my favorite units of the year, is our Christmas Traditions Around the World project. And I love this project because the students get to talk about their religions, they get to talk about their ethnicity and their race, and they get to talk about the traditions that their family values and celebrates. And then they compare and contrast those with the classmates, and just to see what makes them so unique and that we can celebrate those differences has been such a culture shift in our classroom. And just seeing that it's cool that you celebrate that and that I celebrate this, and it's okay. We don't need to do the same things. We don't need to believe the same things, but we can respect one another regardless. So those are just two of the biggest things we've done at the younger learner level.
I think we are getting about time to wrap up. I just want to kind of bring this back to the beginning and just thank you all for sharing your knowledge with all of us this evening. Like I mentioned, it does, I think, give us some power to move forward. I also just want one question I didn't get to, but for everybody to think about, is that in this time, because of all of the uncertainty and sort of, for lack of a better way of saying it, scariness of it all still, to take some time for self-care, for yourselves, for your colleagues, for your students. I know I'm talking to my students almost on a daily basis, asking them what they're doing for self-care right now. I think that that's really important to help us get through. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for allowing me to be part of this great panel, and I'm going to turn it back over to Rosetta.
It would help if I wasn't on mute. I, like Chandra, am just so unbelievably proud and really ecstatic about all that you all brought to this conversation. We talk about diversity all the time. This is a prime example of that in so many ways. in your backgrounds, your experiences, your knowledge, and who you show up as. And I just appreciate the thoughtfulness in which you shared with us today and what you continue to do as educators by educating and informing us. Chandra, thank you. Again, I am so grateful for you for agreeing to navigate this conversation, and you did so expertly. So look out, we might be looking for you again. Thanks to everyone in the chat who participated. We really appreciate you all because you are a part of this community. So we certainly want you to be a part of this discussion. There is still so much more that we need to learn. And as was mentioned earlier, the research is coming in the years. I'm sure it will be interesting and informative. And for the future of education, I think this will be a great way for us to, as Gianina and John spoke to, really kind of dismantle it all and think about other ways that we can educate not only our young people, but all people. As I mentioned, this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube, search for Illinois Wesleyan University Alumni Association. And once you've found it, be sure to subscribe because you can view previous Titan Talks, including Homecoming, that whole week, and also receive notices for future releases. Again, thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.